My name is Lauren, and I never thought I'd end up in a situation where my heart would become a battlefield with no winners, only survivors, and those who gave up. It didn't start with a scandal or a fateful encounter. It started with a move. I was 17 when my dad got a promotion, and we left our little cozy house in Vermont to settle in a suburb of Chicago. For a girl about to start her senior year, changing schools is a sentence worse than any final exam. I remember the first day at the new school like it was yesterday. I stood by the doors with my heart pounding, gripping the strap of my backpack so hard my knuckles turned white. Everyone already had their groups, their lunch tables, their histories, and I was just an empty space. Then I heard a voice. "You look like you're about to run to the parking lot and hitchhike to another state." I turned around. A guy was standing there. Not just any guy. He was tall, dark-haired, with green eyes that usually belong to cats or people who know a little more about life than they should at 17. He was smiling, hands in his jeans pockets, and there was a calmness about him that instantly put me at ease. "I'm Tom," he said, "and if you don't want your first day to be your last, let me give you a tour." A second later, another guy walked up. This one was taller, broader in the shoulders, with blonde hair and a jawline that could cut glass. He reminded me of sunlight breaking through leaves. "And this is Jake," Tom added. "He'll be your bodyguard in the cafeteria. It's a jungle in there." Jake held out his hand. His palm was big, warm, with a firm handshake, the kind of grip that belongs to someone used to getting what he wants. "Don't listen to him," Jake said, grinning. "He's just jealous because I get more attention." That's how I met them both. At that moment, I had no idea that these two would become my whole world, and that they'd decide, all on their own, that I was a prize they couldn't share. It didn't take long to figure out that in this school, Jake and Tom were two sides of the same coin. They'd been friends since childhood, lived 2 houses apart, and had the kind of rare friendship that could survive anything: arguments, girls, successes, failures. Jake was the captain of the football team. His name was on banners, his face on the school calendar. He was the kind of person doors opened for automatically. His parents owned a construction company, so he'd never known what it was like to go without. But he wasn't arrogant. He was good, the kind of good that doesn't try hard, it just exists. Tom was different. His parents were regular people. His mom a teacher, his dad a mechanic. He didn't play football, didn't go to parties where you had to belong. But when he walked into a room full of people, within 5 minutes, everyone was laughing at his jokes. Tom could talk to anyone. He knew how to calm down an angry teacher, how to talk a cop out of writing a ticket, how to find common ground with the local guys everyone else was scared of. His weapon was words. And he wielded them perfectly. We started spending time together. At first, as friends. They saved me a seat at their lunch table, introduced me to their circle, shielded me from the school vultures who usually latch onto new kids. But about a month in, I noticed a kind of invisible tension building between them. They both started showing up more often. Jake drove me to school even though it was out of his way. Tom brought me coffee, exactly how I liked it, even though I'd never told him how I took it. And one night, after a football game, as the 3 of us sat in the bleachers looking at the stars, Jake cleared his throat. "Listen, Lauren, Tom and I talked." Tom nodded, putting on that rare serious face. "We don't want to fight over you," Tom added. "You're not something to split in half, but we both feel the same way about you." My heart dissolved into a puddle somewhere in my stomach. "So here's what we decided," Jake said, glancing at his friend and then at me. "You get to choose, no pressure, no tricks. We'll just be around, and when you're ready, you tell us." They shook hands, like knights of some round table, and from that day on began what I call the best and worst year of my life. That year was a roller coaster. Jake was my ticket to a different life. Through him, I got into parties most girls only dreamed of. His parents had a lake house, and we'd go there on weekends. He took me to the best concerts, introduced me to his friends who always welcomed me. With him, I felt seen, important. But with Tom, I felt alive. Tom would suggest driving to an abandoned amusement park outside town at midnight, just to watch the rusted carousels creak in the wind. He found cozy cafes no one else knew about and could spend hours telling me the history of the streets we walked. Once, we got pulled over. We were going a little too fast in his old Ford. Jake would have just called his parents. But Tom got out of the car, started talking to the officer about the dog sitting in the back of the patrol car, and 5 minutes later we were driving off without a ticket, just a smile and a take it easy. Another time, we accidentally wandered into an area controlled by some local guys. The kind in leather jackets, with looks that send a chill down your spine. Jake probably would have tried to handle it like a man, which could have ended in a fight. But Tom just sat on the hood of their car and started telling a story about how his grandfather used to run deliveries for their boss back in the 70s. Was it true? I don't know. But 10 minutes later, we were sitting around a fire with them, drinking beer and listening to old tales. Tom could talk us out of anything, and it was every bit as intoxicating as Jake's attention. I remember one night after prom, the three of us sitting in Jake's car. Jake was holding my hand. Tom sat in the front seat, staring out the window. I looked from one to the other, and one thought pulsed in my head. How do you choose between the sun and the wind? Between home and the open road? I didn't choose. I told myself, we've got the whole summer ahead. We've got college. I'll decide later. Fate doesn't like being postponed. That call came at 3 a.m. I jolted awake when I saw Jake's name on the screen. His voice sounded foreign, shattered. Lauren, Tom's been arrested. I didn't understand at first. I thought it was some stupid joke, that Tom would pop out from behind a corner with his trademark grin and say, "You should have seen your faces." But it wasn't a joke. That night, Tom had been at a bar with his older cousin. A fight broke out. Someone pulled a knife. Tom tried to break it up, but in the chaos, he landed a blow himself, not on purpose. But it didn't matter. The man died. The trial was fast. Tom couldn't afford the kind of lawyers who could have gotten him out. His parents didn't have that kind of money. He got 20 years. When Jake and I went to see him at the county jail, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. But his eyes were the same. He looked at us, at me, at Jake, and said, "Don't come back. Don't write. Live your lives." I wanted to scream that I wouldn't abandon him, but he raised his hand, and I froze. "Lauren," he said quietly, "I don't want you waiting. I don't want you seeing me like this. Go." Jake's fists clenched so hard his knuckles went white, but he nodded. They exchanged a look, that silent male conversation that doesn't need words. We left. I cried for 3 days. And then life went on, without Tom. Jake was there. He didn't remind me, didn't push, didn't say, "See, you liked me better anyway." He was just there. His shoulder became my fortress. We graduated. I went to college in Chicago. Jake went to business school. We dated on weekends, then every day, then I moved in with him. 5 years later, he proposed. It was at that same lake house where we'd had our first kiss. He got down on one knee, and his blonde hair shone in the sun just like it had at 17. I said yes. Our wedding was grand. Flowers, music, 300 guests. Jake looked at me like I was the only woman in the universe, and I almost believed my heart was at peace. We bought a house in that same suburb where I'd once been terrified of my first day of school. Spacious rooms, a big yard, a separate guest house that Jake jokingly called your future hideout when I drive you crazy. Sophie was born, then Ethan. I became the woman who bakes apple pies on weekends, throws birthday parties with clowns, and worries about utility bills even though the bills were never a problem. Jake took over his father's construction company. He'd come home tired but always smiling. He was a good husband, reliable, loving. I loved him, I really did. But sometimes when I was alone, I thought about Tom. I imagined him behind bars. I thought about his wit, how he could make me laugh on the gloomiest day. And then I'd feel ashamed, because I was Jake's wife, the mother of his children. I had no right to think about someone else. 12 years passed. Sophie was 7, Ethan was 5. And one evening, as I was washing dishes and watching the kids play in the yard, I heard the dog bark by the gate. I dried my hands and stepped onto the porch. A man stood by the gate. He was thinner than I remembered. His dark hair had grayed at the temples, and his face was etched with lines that shouldn't be there on a man in his early 30s. But his eyes were the same. "Hey, Lauren," Tom said. The mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the porch steps. "Tom." He shrugged, and in that gesture there was so much of the old Tom that I couldn't breathe. "Got out early. Good behavior, believe it or not. Thought I'd check in on old friends while I figure out what to do next." I ran to him. I hugged him. He smelled of prison soap and freedom. He hesitated for a moment, then hugged me back carefully, like he was afraid of breaking something. Just then, Jake came out of the house. He stopped on the porch, saw us, and for a moment his face held so much pain, relief, old friendship, that I couldn't read any single emotion. "Tom," Jake said. "Captain," Tom replied, and in those two words, 15 years hung in the air. Jake came down the steps and they hugged. The way men do, hard, with slaps on the back. Two boys who'd once promised not to fight over a girl, standing side by side again. "Come in," Jake said. "Stay in the guest house as long as you need. There's always work for you at my company." Tom looked at me, then at him. "You sure?" "You're my friend," Jake said. "That's not up for debate." Tom stayed. The first few weeks were almost perfect. Tom slid right back into our lives. He played chess with Sophie and Ethan, and they were thrilled that Uncle Tom always let them win without ever making it obvious. He helped me in the kitchen, and we laughed at old jokes. Jake and Tom sat on the porch with beers in the evenings, and I could see my husband relax around his friend, see the boy I'd first met on the football field return. But somewhere deep, where I didn't want to look, something I'd buried for 12 years began to grow. Tom was near, not as a guest, as Tom. I caught myself waiting for him to appear in the kitchen in the morning. I noticed my heart speed up when he laughed. I caught his glances when our eyes met by accident, and in them was the same unspoken question from 17 years ago. One night, Jake was working late. Tom and I sat on the porch, watching the stars. He talked about prison. Not much, but enough for me to understand that he'd come out not just a different man, but a man who understood that time was the only thing he'd never had enough of. "I thought about you guys," he said quietly. "The whole time, about you and Jake. I pictured you married with kids, and I was glad it worked out." I wanted to say, "Me too," but the words got stuck. Because I wasn't sure I was glad. I realized it in that moment when he took my hand, just to point out a constellation, and I didn't pull away, and he didn't either. We sat like that for a long time, silent, breathing the same air. The next day, I noticed Jake had changed. He was quieter, watching more closely. He saw what I was trying to hide. And one evening, after the kids were asleep, he said, "We need to talk, all three of us." We gathered in the living room. I sat on the couch, twisting my hands. Jake stood by the fireplace, leaning against the mantel. Tom sat in an armchair, his face calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. "I love you, Lauren," he said, looking at me. "And I love you, Tom. You two are the most important people in my life, but I'm not blind." He ran a hand over his face. "When we were kids, we decided you'd choose, fair and square. But the truth is," he looked at Tom, and in his voice was a bitterness I'd never heard. "The competition dropped out not because I was better, but because fate stepped in. I didn't win fair and square." "Jake," Tom started, but Jake raised a hand. "Let me finish. I've lived with this for 12 years. Every time I looked at her, I knew, if you'd been around, I don't know who she would have picked, and now you're here. And I see the way she looks at you, and the way you look at her." The room went so quiet it was like the sound had been switched off. "I'm not going to be a third wheel in my own marriage," Jake said firmly. "I refuse to stand on the sidelines while the two of you find each other. But I'm also not going to keep you, Lauren, by force. You need to choose." My heart was pounding so hard, I could hear it in my temples. "If you choose me," Jake continued, "we forget this conversation ever happened. Tom finds another place to live and we move on. If you choose him, he paused and his voice cracked slightly. I'll accept it. We'll split up decently. The kids will stay with me or with you, whatever you decide. But I won't stand by and watch my heart get broken slowly, day by day. He looked at Tom. I offered you a home and a job as a friend, but if you came to take my wife, say it now. Tom stood. He looked like he'd been hit. I didn't come to take anything, he said. I came to see how you were doing. I never asked her to choose. Not then, not now. They both looked at me. And I was right back where I should have been 17 years ago, caught between two fires. I looked at Jake, at the man who'd been there with me through the hardest days, who held me when I cried over Tom, who built our life brick by brick, never asking for anything in return. His hands built houses and his heart built me. He was stability. He was home. He was the father of my children, and I knew, with him, I'd never fall. Then I looked at Tom, at the one who could talk us out of any mess but couldn't talk himself out of his own, whose wit and words opened every door except prison doors, who was the wind, the open road, the spark, and I felt that spark still glowing inside me. I loved them both. But there are different kinds of love. One is like a tree, deep roots, strong bark, growing for years, offering shade in the heat. The other is like fire, bright and warm, it keeps you safe, but can burn everything down if you let it get out of control. I thought about Sophie, about Ethan, about how they laugh when Tom builds pillow forts with them, and how Jake holds the back of their bike seats, running alongside until they find their balance. I thought about what it means to choose, and what it means to stay. I can't, I finally said. Tom flinched. Jake froze. I can't choose, I repeated quieter, and that is my answer. I stood. My legs were shaking. If I go with Tom, I destroy what we've been building for 12 years, Jake. I destroy our family, and I could never be happy knowing I left you. And if you stay with me, Jake asked quietly. If I stay with you, I looked at Tom, and tears finally started rolling down my cheeks. I'll wake up every morning thinking I turned him away a second time, and it'll eat me up inside. I took a deep breath. I'm not choosing anyone, because if I choose one, I lose part of myself, and I don't want to live half a life. Tom lowered his head. Jake wiped a hand across his face. But you can't just leave it like this, Jake said. I can't live in this triangle. I know, I said. That's why Tom has to leave. The words fell like stones. I looked at Tom. His face was pale. Tom, I said, you're free, you got out. You need to start a new life. Not here, not next to me. Because if you stay, the three of us will burn. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded. You were always smarter than both of us, he said, and for a moment, a shadow of his old smile flickered. He walked over to Jake. They hugged, hard, long. Take care of her, Tom said. Always, Jake replied. Tom looked at me. He walked over, cupped my face in his hands, and kissed my forehead. Lightly, like the wind. Goodbye, Lauren, he said. And he left. I heard his car start. I heard it pull out of our driveway. And when the sound faded into the night, I sank to the floor and cried. Jake sat down beside me. He didn't say anything. He just held me. I don't know if I made the right choice. Maybe a year from now, I'll wake up and realize I made a mistake. Maybe Tom will meet someone else, and I'll be happy for him. Or maybe I'll stay with Jake and learn to live with the quiet note of sadness that will always play somewhere at the edge of my consciousness. But that night, I understood one thing. Sometimes choice isn't about who is better. Sometimes choice is about what loss can I survive. I chose the loss that wouldn't destroy my world. I chose the home I already had. I chose the person who never gave me a reason to doubt his devotion. Is that love? Maybe, or maybe it's something more. Maybe it's maturity, or exhaustion, or fear. Or maybe it's just life, which, as it turns out, doesn't always let you choose. Sometimes it chooses for you.